Welcome to Conspiracist. We're embarking on a deep dive today into a compelling hypothesis that governments have intentionally concealed evidence related to hypnotic control theories. Our mission is to explore the arguments and purported evidence surrounding this idea, maintaining a strictly professional and objective lens throughout our discussion. Let's start by unpacking what our sources reveal about the core concepts of hypnosis and control.
Okay. So our exploration really begins with understanding hypnosis itself, which our sources indicate is viewed in pretty contrasting ways.
Contrasting how?
Well, popular culture often paints it as, a means of direct control, taking over someone's will, even against their will, probably influenced by dramatic stuff, movies and shows.
All right, like the Manchurian Candidate trope.
Exactly that. But then you have the more scientific perspective, which some of our material supports. And that describes hypnosis more as a state of heightened focus and, suggestibility.
Suggestibility.
Yeah, where the individual is generally seen as a willing participant.
So quite a stark difference right there from the get-go. Yet, you mentioned nuances. Our sources seem to complicate this neat divide a bit. What stands out there?
Well, one really intriguing point comes from an online discussion we looked at. A user raised the possibility that certain underlying conditions, maybe like undiagnosed schizophrenia, which is estimated to affect, maybe 1% of people, that this might predispose individuals potentially to being hypnotized without their, let's say, full conscious consent.
That's a serious consideration. It really underscores the ethical side, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Caution, ethics, it all comes into play there.
And it certainly challenges that common idea that it always needs complete voluntary participation. The same discussion, didn't it also touch on long-term conditioning? How does that fit in?
Yes, it did. Another participant, someone who described having experience as a hypnotic subject themselves, suggested that prolonged skillful conditioning, it could potentially blur the lines.
Blur the lines of control.
Yeah, blur the lines of a subject's volitional control over time. It raises questions about, just how absolute someone's autonomy is under extended hypnotic influence.
Interesting. And then there's this other idea we found that ultimately individuals hypnotize themselves. How does that square with the concept of external control?
Well, that viewpoint really emphasizes the active role of the person being hypnotized. They have to engage, enter the state, maintain it.
So the hypnotist is more of a guide.
Exactly, a facilitator guiding the process. But the subject's own receptivity, their focused attention, that's essential. So that perspective leans much more towards self-regulation, really, than external manipulation.
Okay. Our sources also brought up something called pattern interrupts and social compliance. I think it was in the context of street robbery. What's the link there?
Right, that was mentioned by someone with a background in, I think, magic and NLP. These techniques, they involve disrupting a person's normal thought process, their cognitive flow.
To make them more susceptible.
In that immediate moment, yes, a sudden unexpected action or maybe a rapid string of commands, it can briefly bypass critical thinking. It's not formal hypnosis, obviously, but some might see parallels in how quickly it can influence behavior by sort of short-circuiting normal conscious processing.
Like creating a temporary window. A window of heightened suggestibility. I think the transcript from that neurotransmissions video also mentioned bypassing critical faculties.
It did, yes. That source proposed that hypnosis might temporarily modulate certain cognitive functions, things like critical analysis, inhibition, even skepticism.
And that shift could explain the receptiveness.
Potentially, yes.
Right.
Why people under hypnosis might accept suggestions they'd normally question or just reject outright.
Okay, so we're seeing a really multifaceted picture of hypnosis itself. Yeah. Willing participation, potential vulnerabilities, these rapid influence techniques. Let's pivot now to the historical context. What does our material show about actual government interest in mind control research?
Well, the historical record is pretty clear on this. There was significant government interest, particularly during the Cold War. Project MKUltra is the big one, the most prominent example in our sources.
The CIA program from the 50s?
That's the one. A really broad range of research into methods for influencing and, yes, controlling human behavior.
And MKUltra wasn't alone, was it? We saw mentions of MK Delta, MK Search. What were they about?
Right. MK Delta, based on investigative reports, was focused on developing and using various materials, mostly drugs for interrogation, but also potentially for harassment, discrediting people, or incapacitating them.
And MK Search.
That seems to have been a continuation of the earlier work. It involved the Army Chemical Corps alongside the CIA. The stated goal was finding new agents, new methods to get predictable changes in human behavior.
Predictable changes.
Yes. And M. Cofton and M.K. Chickwit were apparently sub-projects running under that MK Search umbrella.
It really sounds like a sustained, multi-pronged effort. And these programs, they involved experiments on actual people.
Yes. The historical investigations, like the Church Committee reports, revealed experiments on both knowing and, crucially, unwitting subjects.
Unwitting. So without their consent.
That's what the reports indicate. Both in the U.S. and Canada, these experiments used psychoactive drugs. LSD, mescaline were common, but also other chemical, biological, and psychological methods.
That's disturbing, especially the lack of consent. And what happened to the records, the details of all this?
Well, that's a key part of the story. A significant chunk of the MKUltra files were deliberately destroyed in 1973.
Destroyed? Why?
The official reasons given at the time were varied, but the act itself, as our material notes, has undeniably fueled suspicion. It created a climate where theories about the program's true scope and aims could really flourish.
Understandably. That lack of transparency definitely invites speculation. What was the original spark for MKUltra? Why did they start it?
A primary motivation, according to our sources, was the need to respond to alleged mind control techniques used by the Soviets, Chinese, and North Koreans, specifically on American POWs during the Korean War.
Ah, the Cold War context again. Fear of the other side having an edge.
Exactly. A national security concern, a perceived need to understand these techniques, maybe even replicate them.
So it was reactive in part.
Mm-hmm.
And where did hypnosis specifically fit into the CIA's research plans?
Project Artichoke comes up specifically. It's mentioned as a CIA project that explored using hypnosis, potentially, to create an unwitting assassin.
An unwitting assassin through hypnosis. That's straight out of fiction.
It sounds like it, but it shows direct governmental interest in the potential, let's say, operational applications of hypnotic influence.
Beyond hypnosis, LSD seemed like a major focus for the CIA. What were they hoping to do with it?
The Office of Security within the CIA did use LSD in interrogations, and one key figure in MKUltra apparently believed it had a real potential for covert ops.
Like what kind of ops?
Influencing high-ranking officials, perhaps. The idea was that its temporary psychoactive effects might subtly sway critical meetings or decisions without anyone realizing.
But LSD didn't turn out to be the magic bullet they hoped for.
No, exactly. Our sources indicate researchers eventually found LSD just too unpredictable. The effects varied too much between people and situations.
So they moved on.
Yes, that led to developing other substances. Things described as super hallucinogens, like BZ. The hope was these would offer more predictable, controllable, mind-altering effects.
Okay, this history clearly shows governments were deeply involved in mind control research, and that included looking hard at hypnosis. Let's shift now to brainwashing. Our sources suggest that term itself is viewed pretty skeptically.
That's a really key point, yes. After the Korean War, a 1956 U.S. Army report actually looked into brainwashing again, and it concluded it was mostly a popular misconception.
The Army itself said that.
Yes. The report stated that after expensive analysis, they couldn't find conclusive proof of systematic brainwashing of American POWs in Korea.
So this idea of complete psychological reprogramming was questioned quite early on, even by the military. Does that skepticism carry over into, say, legal situations?
It does seem to. The brainwashing defense has popped up in some famous court cases like Patty Hearst or Charles Manson, but generally it hasn't been very successful legally. Courts seem wary of the idea of complete coercive control erasing free will.
And what about academia? Particularly researchers looking at cults and influence.
Well, sociologist Benjamin Zablocki pointed out something interesting. He noted a kind of disconnect. You hear lots of anecdotal stories about brainwashing, right? But in the peer-reviewed sociology journals, particularly those focused on religion, articles supporting that brainwashing perspective are largely absent.
Absent? Why?
He suggested the concept has almost been, quote, blacklisted within the field, not taken seriously by mainstream academia.
And this isn't just one person's view.
No, anthropologist Adam Klinoran's research backs this up globally. He stated that courts pretty much worldwide have largely rejected cult brainwashing as a valid legal or scientific explanation for behavior.
So widespread skepticism. Even the American Psychological Association, the APA, looked into this formally, didn't they?
They did. Back in 1983, the APA set up a task force, DIMPAC it was called, to look at deceptive and indirect techniques of persuasion and control, especially regarding cults.
And what did they find?
The task force did conclude that, yes, these techniques can compromise freedom and cause harm, particularly in cults or large group awareness trainings. However, and this is important, the APA's board ultimately rejected the task force's final report.
Rejected it? On what grounds?
They cited concerns about its scientific rigor, they felt it lacked sufficient evidence, and perhaps wasn't even handed enough in its approach.
So even a dedicated psychological investigation hit roadblocks and didn't get full endorsement.
That brings us to hypnosis itself and potential unwanted side effects. What did our material show there? Is that research much?
Well, our sources actually screened research into the negative effects of hypnosis as, quote, an unwelcome pursuit.
Unwelcome? Why would that be?
Potentially because of concerns it might undermine the therapy side of hypnosis, damage its reputation as a helpful tool. But despite that, some early studies did document after effects. What sort of effects are we talking about?
Research from the 60s mentioned things like headaches, sometimes regressive dreams, occasionally linked to bad reactions someone had previously, maybe to childhood anesthesia, things like that.
Yeah, more recently.
More contemporary observations list short-term things like drowsiness, maybe some cognitive distortion, anxiety, and longer-term issues like headaches again, dizziness, even nausea in some cases.
So mostly minor discomforts, or can it be more serious?
It seems it can be. Case reports in the clinical literature warn against using hypnosis with people who already have significant psychopathology. There's a risk it could precipitate severe anxiety or psychosomatic problems.
Precipitate, as in trigger them.
Trigger or worsen them, yes. There have even been reports of instances where psychosis seemed to be triggered or made worse after hypnosis.
Wow, we also saw reference to a UK court case. Someone developing schizophrenia after stage hypnosis.
That's right. In 1998, an individual reportedly developed schizophrenia within about a week of being part of a stage hypnosis show. They sued the hypnotist.
And what happened?
The case against the hypnotist wasn't successful, legally speaking, but the case itself, even though legally inconclusive, does highlight the potential, however rare, for really significant adverse psychological reactions.
It's quite a link.
And it's interesting, historically, scientists have pondered the link between hypnosis and schizophrenia. Even Pavlov, back in the day, apparently considered schizophrenia might be a kind of chronic hypnotic state.
Okay, so we have this backdrop.
Okay.
Clear government interest in mind control, including hypnosis, widespread skepticism about extreme brainwashing, but also documented potential for hypnosis to have negative effects, sometimes serious ones. Based on all that, what arguments could be made for the idea that governments have intentionally concealed theories or findings about hypnotic control? What hints are there in the sources?
Well, while our sources don't often state it directly as, here's proof of concealment, you can infer some arguments. Firstly, the intense secrecy around programs like MKUltra, and especially the deliberate destruction of records that clearly suggests a strong desire to keep this kind of research hidden from public view, that's undeniable.
Secrecy breeds suspicion.
Exactly. Then there's motive. If governments did develop effective influence techniques, wouldn't there be a strong incentive for national security, intelligence gatherings, strategic advantage to keep that knowledge restricted, keep it out of the hands of adversaries, or even the general public?
Makes sense from a certain perspective. And what about the way brainwashing was discredited? Could that play a role?
That's a plausible line of thought. By focusing on debunking the really extreme, maybe less credible idea of total brainwashing, perhaps more subtle, more nuanced, and potentially more effective techniques of influence get less attention. They might be obscured, perhaps deliberately downplayed.
Hiding in plain sight almost.
Or at least diverting attention. Plus, think about the potential for misuse. If the full power, the full potential risks of hypnotic techniques were widely understood and acknowledged, that could be dangerous. So maybe there's a rationale there for keeping a tight lid on the information.
And that unwelcome pursuit aspect you mentioned earlier, research into negative effects being discouraged.
Yes, that could also contribute. If exploring the full spectrum of hypnotic influence, including its downsides and dangers, is discouraged or underfunded, then our understanding remains incomplete. And gaps in understanding make concealment easier, intentionally or not.
Okay, those are some compelling points for the concealment hypothesis. But our sources also offered counter-arguments, right? Alternative explanations for why we don't see smoking gun proof of hidden hypnotic control tech.
Absolutely. A major one is simply scientific skepticism. Many experts remain doubtful about the more extreme claims of mind control, especially achieving long-lasting involuntary behavioral changes purely through hypnosis. The science might just not support those dramatic ideas.
The hype versus the reality.
Precisely. And then there's the hypnotherapy community itself. The emphasis we saw in those online discussions on informed consent, ethical practice, safety that suggests a degree of self-regulation within the field that might work against widespread unethical use or concealment.
And the difference between stage hypnosis and other forms.
That's crucial, too. Stage hypnosis often relies heavily on participant selection, social compliance, expectation. It's entertainment. It's very different from controlled therapeutic or research settings. We shouldn't necessarily extrapolate the apparent power seen on stage to covert government programs.
Good point. And maybe, just maybe, the lack of concrete evidence for this grand concealment is because it didn't happen on a large scale, or the techniques weren't as effective as feared.
That's a very real possibility. It could be that despite all the historical interest in research, like MKUltra, developing truly reliable, controllable hypnotic techniques for manipulation just proved much harder, much less successful than the theories suggest. The science might have hit limits.
So the capability wasn't there to conceal.
Or wasn't as dramatic as imagined. And finally, we should remember what some research suggests about conspiracy beliefs themselves. Believing in cover-ups can stem from various psychological factors and doesn't automatically mean a cover-up actually exists.
Right. The belief itself needs scrutiny.
Exactly.
Okay. Today's deep dive into the hypothesis of government concealment of hypnotic control theories really reveals a complex landscape, doesn't it? We've got historical research like MKUltra showing clear government interest, public perception shaped by media, and the actual scientific understanding, which is often more nuanced.
It is complex. The past programs show the interest was definitely there, but the extent of what was achieved and how much might have been intentionally hidden versus just, well, not panning out or being kept secret for more mundane security reasons, that's still debated.
Yeah. Our exploration of the sources definitely highlights both the potential power of suggestion and influence, but also the really significant scientific limits and huge ethical questions around it all. So this leaves a final thought for you, our listener. Considering that historical context, the secrecy, the scientific debates about suggestion and influence, what do you ultimately make of the claims of intentional concealment in this really intriguing field? Thanks for listening to Conspiracist.